Hello, everyone. I'm Janine Donnelly, Director of Webinars for Tech Channel, and I'd like to welcome you to our presentation, Financial Services Resilience. We will be holding a Q&A session at the end of the webinar, but feel free to ask a question or submit a comment at any time during the event by entering it into the Ask a Question panel. You may download a PDF version of today's slide deck by clicking on the drop-down menu labeled Event Resources and clicking on the slide deck. Know that you can download those right from the platform without being disconnected from the webinar. Today's webinar is sponsored by BMC. And now I'd like to turn it over to Priya Doherty, Vice President of Solutions Marketing at BMC, to kick things off. Priya, you now have the floor.
All right, Janine. Well, thank you so much. And thanks to the Tech Channel audience for this webinar today. And as Janine mentioned, I am Priya Doherty, and I'm Vice President for Solutions Marketing here at BMC. So BMC Software is a company, just as a reminder, that is all about helping our customers innovate faster. And we do that through helping them to automate any critical applications, systems, services that they may have. And the focus of today's session is specifically around financial services companies. So BMC works with a number of these companies. In fact, we work with over 20 of the top 25 global banks in the world, and we have built up a lot of experience on these banks over time. And what we wanted to talk about today was a little bit on the topic of resilience, which is, a broad term that can impact security, but also compliance to regulations, and how critical that is to the financial services industry. So today I'm very excited because we have a really awesome set of panelists today to discuss this topic. We have Eric Newcomer, who is the CTO and principal analyst at Intellix. He is going to join us and share his perspective on what he knows from his time in industry and also his time as an analyst. We have myself, I'll be your moderator today, working with Eric and our panelists. Our panelists will join us about halfway through this discussion, and they will help us answer the questions that you may have, as well as some of the questions that we've prepared. And with us is Mark Banwell. Mark is an area vice president for product management, and he focuses very specifically on security and operations in the mainframe space. So he has a wealth of information about that topic. So welcome, Mark. We also have Peter Plevka, who is an advocate and optimization expert focused on technical support and advocacy, working with some of our top clients all over the world and specifically in the EMEA and Europe region. And he is also a wealth of experience and knowledge on the topics of cost optimization, optimizing your mainframe, and more. So welcome, Peter. And we have Ted Bacon, who is a director for strategic sales, and he focuses on many of our top clients as well as our ecosystem and partners. So I welcome Ted as well. So I just want to mention the flow of this conversation and also ask the people that are on the bridge, please feel free to ask your questions. We do want to answer them. We will try to get to them in the panel. The flow of the conversation this morning will be, I will share a little bit just to give some context about the mainframe in the financial services industry. Then Eric will join, and Eric Newcomer is going to provide some of his experiences and background on the topic of resilience in this industry. And then we're going to turn it over to a little bit of background on some of the BMC solutions, followed by a detailed set of questions with our panelists. All right. Oh, and I forgot to mention, it is interactive and there will be polling questions throughout. You can, of course, feel free to answer those polls. You don't have to answer those polls if you don't want to, but definitely challenge yourselves if you can. So with that, let's just talk a little bit about what's going on in the financial services industry as it relates to mainframe. Now, I think the core thing to be aware is that the industry continues to invest in this platform. So 89% of financial services firms are growing or maintaining their commitment to the mainframe platform. And this is data that we have from 2024 with BMC's annual survey that we do. We also find that 69% of financial services organizations anticipate either steady or increasing usage on that platform. So what this really indicates is that the financial services industry does use the mainframe for their core systems, and they continue to see that the qualities of the mainframe, the reliability, availability, the transaction scalability, are what is keeping them using this platform compared to alternatives, and they're seeing growth in the usage and the investment. Now, with all that said, the top challenge that our customers tell us, again, through our survey that we do every year, the top challenge that they have is security and compliance. And it's not even close. I mean, it's the absolute number one concern that is keeping the users and the managers of this platform up at night. And it's not because the mainframe is inherently insecure. It is because the industry demands a certain level of regulation and a certain level of security that they need to follow. All that being said, the costs of not being secure are rising. So we are finding now that the average ransomware attack is costing over $6 million. And the vast majority of attacks, 63%, are actually asking for over $1 million. And there has been, I know it almost sounds like a broken record, but it continues to be the case. There's just been an increasing amount of attacks and ransomware demands. So a 5x increase in the average demand just in the last 2 years alone. This is not a case where it's just it's just growing linearly. It's actually accelerating. And to that point, financial services firms in particular have seen a 91% increase in those attacks, and they continue to face them all over the world, with North America facing about 55% of those attacks, but Europe up 64% as well. So the point is, you have to do something. You cannot ignore this. And particularly when it comes to the mainframe, this is typically where a lot of the crown jewel data that companies have in their core systems is sitting. So if they're not protecting that data, it's probably too late. The objective, of course, is to reach that level of protection, to be able to recover from ransomware, to be able to protect your data wherever it may reside, on-prem, in flight, in the cloud, and of course, be able to recover as fast as possible if something is to happen. All right, so with that said, I'm going to go now to our first poll question. So I'd love to know from the audience, how prepared do you feel the organization that you work for or that you support, how prepared are you to recover from a ransomware or cyber attack that may be affecting your mainframe? We'll give the poll here a minute to build. And again, very interested to hear the answers to this. And while we're waiting for the answers to come in, I'd love to ask Eric if you have a sense of, if you have any guesses as to what you think the audience may come back with.
I think this is a common topic. In my experience in the industry, I worked for a couple of years as chief security architect for a consumer bank at Citi, and this was always something that was in our minds. Could I say we were always confident we were completely prepared for it? No. Our landscape was very large and varied, a lot of different attack services, attack vectors, a lot of different data storages, a lot of different applications, very complex to protect it all. I would say, my point of view, when I was working there, and it was a couple of years ago now, but when I was working there, I'd say we were generally prepared, but we couldn't be confident that everything was really locked down as well as it should have been.
Okay, Priya, I've sent the results to the audience.
Excellent. All right, so it's, I think, picking up, Eric, on what you said, it's actually what I'm seeing in the results as well. What we're seeing is there's a small, maybe about 50% of you feeling like you're either very prepared or somewhat prepared, which is great. And then another almost 50% who said we're either unprepared or unsure. So nobody said they were not very prepared. So you're either very confident that you're somewhat prepared, or you're not sure and you don't know a lot about what the situation may be. So hopefully this webinar can help illuminate the people that are feeling not sure, and can also help with providing some strategies and ideas for how to handle the situation if you do feel like you're prepared. All right, so with that said, Eric, I'm going to turn it over to you to talk a little bit about the experiences that you have had and what you think the audience should know.
Okay, thanks, Priya. As I mentioned, I spent 2 years as Chief Security Architect for Consumer Bank at Citi, reporting to the Consumer Bank CISO. And certainly ransomware protection was one of the top tasks we had to evaluate, but there were other things as well. My background, other than this, was mainly in technology companies, and then 10 years total in financial services. After I left there, I decided to go in the analyst track for my next career step and joined Intellex about 2 years ago. And there we do a lot of briefings, and we work with our customers on helping them prepare for the market. But I do want to go back to my experience at Citi for this particular topic and talk about, some perspectives from that experience. So next slide, please. I guess we can start it off with a bang. I was there during the time the Capital One breach was announced, and this was a real shockwave for us. We were right in the middle of starting to migrate to the cloud, and initially we didn't really understand how this could have happened, but it turned out that it was, and it turned out to be $100 million to $150 million expense for Capital One. But more so than that, it just scared the heck out of us. Could this happen to us? And it wasn't just the financial penalty, the regulatory worry, but the reputational worry that got us. We looked into the root cause analysis of it, and we discovered finally that this was the result of an overprivileged account accessing the Capital One cloud storage. And through that overprivilege, they were able to steal the encryption keys and decrypt the data. We were always encrypting our data. We were always careful about this. And it turned out, in this case, the overprivileged ID allowed the attacker to steal the encryption keys, unencrypt the data, and steal it. So that we were pretty worried about. Next slide, please. So building on this, the fact that we were aware of the breaches, and we were aware that phishing, social engineering, and brute force attempts to steal usernames and passwords, we had this every day. Part of my team was responsible for responding to credential stuffing attacks. These were the attacks where companies, cyber attackers, would send up huge banks and clusters of compute and just cycle through combinations of username and passwords so they could break in. And this was, of course, an ongoing battle. We would protect, they would attack, and so on. And we had to really worry about this because in the modern day banking environment, in the cybersecurity is the equivalent of the bank vault. In the old days of banking, customers would go into a branch and see this wonderful vault that protected their money. And today they have to worry about their data, and they have to know and be confident that their banks are protecting it the way they would protect their money. Through this, we had to look at everything. We've been talking about ransomware. Ransomware was a huge danger, and the ransomware attacks were increasing. We had to be prepared for that. But we know that also the biggest cause of ransomware attacks, or the biggest avenue for a ransomware attack, was a stolen ID and stolen credential, which gets us back to why we're so worried about the Capital One breach, because this was a stealing a stolen credential-based attack, which could lead to any number of the vulnerabilities. And it was even worse in the cloud, as we could see. The cloud is designed for easy internet access, and therefore it's a little more risky. And as I mentioned, the credential theft and the overprivileged access, a big pain in the ass. So that's what we were looking at. Okay, next slide, please. And of course, we have the regulators that we had to report to, and they're focused on all of these things, including continuity of business, data protection, security, all defense against ransomware, customer data breaches. We would have to report to this regularly, every week in some cases, every month in other cases. The city board actually, the corporate board actually asked for monthly reports from the cybersecurity team as well, because it was really that high level of an issue for the bank in terms of reputation and security and customer interactions and so on. And we knew as well that the perimeter defense isn't enough. The firewalls, the web application servers, we knew that somebody would break in, because they did break in. And Citi, as a huge bank, one of the largest banks in the world, was subject to hundreds of thousands of attacks per day. And if any of them got in, what was the next level of protection? We had to encrypt everything in transit to prevent wiretapping, encrypt data at rest to prevent data from being stolen, although as we saw from the Capital One account, the keys for the encryption had been stolen, so maybe that wasn't enough. We had to have strict ID privilege access controls as well. This was big for the cloud, even worse for the cloud, and that actually caused us a big concern in terms of cloud migration, because cloud IDs are riskier, because in the cloud, operation is done by APIs, and IDs for APIs could have overprivileged and inadvertently exposed data out to the internet if developers change the security policy. Okay, next one, please. So while we're looking at this, we had to figure out what's the comprehensive threat landscape review. We had to think from the perimeter to the database and back. Everyone doesn't always think about the path back, but the path back is also vulnerable when you get the response from the database. Internal communications, we had to think of the whole landscape and figure out where the vulnerabilities were, where the danger points were. And we took a security framework. We used SABSA, but there are many others out there which helped you frame this discussion and frame this investigation, if you will, and to try to figure out where the vulnerabilities are. And authentication strength is a big part of this as well, because, as I said, the IDs is a big attack vector, and this applies to APIs as well as user IDs. On air-gap backups, a huge part of what we needed to do, because we knew if anybody broke in, if they get into the database, if they did get into a ransomware situation where they locked things up and there was a problem, you needed to have the immutable copies of the data to put back in place. And this applied not only for ransomware, but if somebody broke in and touched a database, we didn't know what happened. We knew we would know we'd need to have to restore it to keep the business going. And we also needed this to be geographic. We were a global bank. We needed to have continuity of business, disaster recovery in place. All of these things were part of the program to make sure whatever happened in this relentless attack environment that we're in, where cyber criminals have a lot more money to spend than cyber defense teams have, we had to make sure this was all bulletproof.
And
okay.
Eric, if I may ask just a quick clarification, how did you define immutable copies of data in your in this work?
Well, this was basically copies that were safe from the attackers to get at, and we were looking at, particularly at the cloud and cloud storage, which had immutability as an attribute. It could be really locked down, and you wanted it to be air gapped as well, so that was a way out of the communication path. Somebody could not get to it from the network if they attacked. So it was safe backup, safe from attackers, immutable, locked down. Cloud storage had this. There were various options for this that various departments were looking at. But what the ultimate goal was to make sure there was a copy of the data available in case of any of these attacks hitting the data, ransomware, decrypting keys, wherever we needed to recover, that we could be able to do it very quickly and keep the business going, and that data, the backup data, was also safe from attack.
Got it. Thank you.
Okay, next one, please. So now switching hats to being in my analyst role, I want to give a little perspective from Intellex about the AMI Cloud Vault. We're going to talk a little bit more about today, but the AMI Cloud Vault from BMC provides a key component to a solution here for securing data. I haven't mentioned it before, but It also applies to AI data. I probably should have mentioned this earlier. They weren't all concerned about data. We also have to be concerned about what's going on with AI. I've heard a horror story from some of my former colleagues. When the AI edict came down from the CIO, the IT people wanted to make a complete copy of production data in order to train the AI. You just cannot do this. But this is such a frenzy, such a competitive race to get AI done that security sometimes gets thrown out the window, and you just cannot do that. You have to make sure all of these things are in place for your AI data as well. So in terms of BMC AMI Cloud Vault, what you're finding here with this solution, from the analyst point of view, is you're getting cost-effective a solution with industry-leading capabilities. You get the benefit of cloud object storage, which is very cost-effective. You want to have a backup of your data, but you don't want to use those expensive mainframe resources for this. At Citi, our mainframe was providing our core banking capabilities. It had all of our core customer data in it, and that's the crown jewels, and that needed to be protected. But to double that storage on the mainframe was very costly. And we were, as I said earlier, looking at cloud storage as a better alternative for cost efficiency because it's immutable. And this is what you get through the AMI Cloud Vault. And Cloud Vault as well gets your data helps you get the data from mainframe storage to object storage securely. And it helps, as I said, with the cloud-based storage, create the mutable copies, creates an environment for fast restore that you need, and automatically can perform the recovery and give forensics report that you need for regulatory review, and helps with managing the data in the cloud as well. Okay, next slide, please. And I think we'll just wrap it up here and talk a little bit more about the benefits of the AMI Cloud Vault solution. It provides these, it provides what you need for this part of your cyber defense. And this part of the cyber defense is hugely important, as we've been talking about. The data is the crown jewel. The customer data is the crown jewel. Customer data has to be protected. Customers and regulators have to know that you, as a key bank or any kind of a financial services company, is protecting customer data equally well as how you protect the money, and that you have a solution for cyber attacks should they be successful, and we know they will be successful. We were all scared by the Capital One attack, but that's hardly the only successful attack over the last few years. And we know we have to be ready at all levels to provide a response to these attacks. And this is something that the BMC AMI Cloud Vault really helps you with. And as it said here, the mainframes are increasingly used for APIs. We use the APIs for the mobile app at Citi. A lot of banks do this. And their core banking systems are also used for GenAI data sourcing. So these levels of protection for APIs, GenAI data sourcing are equally important. You need globally available a solution as well, especially if you're a large financial services company. And you need a variety of these recovery protocols and reporting back to data. And what you've done for data protection back to the regulators, and provide root cause analysis and prevention. And BMC AMI Vault is one of the solutions that can help with all of these things, and a key aspect of what we're talking about today. Okay, Priya, I guess that's it for me.
Very, very interesting. Thank you, Eric, for your perspective. I maybe just want to ask you one question, which is, if you had to go back to some of the experiences that you had on the client side with Citi, what was the biggest surprise in that journey of locking your data down?
I think as we started the talk, we were very surprised to find out that somebody could break in, steal credentials, and have them be privileged credentials to the point at which they could actually steal encryption keys. That put all of our programs of second line defense at risk. And we had to make sure we had that third line of defense, the immutable backup, ready in case somebody broke in and stole a key. That really concerned us.
Yeah, I can imagine if it was a privileged user versus just anybody. But thank you for sharing that. And again, audience, I want to mention, if you have questions of Eric or the panelists, please start to get them ready. We are going to now turn over to our second poll question here and just ask the question, what are the most effective second and third lines of defense for perimeter breach? And so, Eric, I'm going to ask you to help answer. Let's take a look and see what kind of responses we get back here. And then maybe we can comment on it.
Sure. We were just talking about this. We know the perimeter is going to get breached. It has been breached. We've got many examples publicly reported of breaches with data theft. And what are the mechanisms to protect against that? There's encryption of the data, encryption of the communications, Hash-time verification for continuity of business, immutable backups.
Yeah.
Perhaps, as we talked about, could be on the list.
And so looking at some of the responses, it looks like we've got the majority seem to be saying either encryption at rest or encryption in transit.
Yep.
Yeah.
That was our plan as well. We had a big program to make sure all communications were using TLS between applications, between web application firewalls and applications and database. All databases encrypted. Absolutely the first thing to think about. But you also, as we've talked about here, have to consider what happens if that doesn't work.
And Priya, I have sent those results to the audience.
Very good. Yeah. So I think in general, the first two seem to be the ones that are the most impactful here. Good deal. All right. So we are going to continue now into talking a little bit about some of the point of view that BMC has on this topic. And I'll just spend a few minutes on that, and then we'll turn it over to our panelists. So to kind of wrap up a little bit of what Eric was just talking about, one of the fundamental technologies that BMC has been working on is this concept of using object storage or hybrid cloud storage in a mainframe environment. And the way that enabling technology, we'll talk about in a minute, but it has some key positive outcomes for your businesses. Firstly, it drives cost optimization. Eric was talking a little bit about that, but moving from a hardware-based or legacy-based storage solution towards more of an object-based storage solution, which is software-based, can lead to cost optimization. There's also reduced complexity. There's improvement to regulatory compliance, and we're going to talk a little bit about that in terms of being able to meet some of the new regulations that are emerging, many of which are in response to issues around ransomware and the pace of ransomware attacks in the financial services industry. Generating and having more cyber resilience, being able to detect and recover and prevent future attacks is a key positive outcome, as well as AI and analytics. We all know that it's coming. Eric mentioned that there was a desire to use AI and analytics at his prior company, and being able to take mainframe data and move it into cloud-based or AI-based solutions is also a desire that many companies have. And then there's flexibility and agility, which comes in the form of workforce skills and workforce flexibility, having more industry standard needs for your people, and also scalability and flexibility just in general for IT. So these are just some of the outcomes that clients are seeing as a result of moving to this object storage approach. Now, BMC's perspective is that you can really think of reimagining the data that you have in mainframes in a hybrid cloud way. And the solution that we offer is very disruptive. The topic or the approach that we use has sort of three key use cases. The first use case is focused on your core data and data protection, and that's BMC AMI Cloud Data. And the goal there is really to say, listen, you've got potentially data sitting in tape storage as secondary storage. Let's replace that with object storage. That has been the focus of previous webinars, and today's focus is more on Amy Cloud Vault, because the focus here is around cyber resiliency and using object storage for that purpose. If you are interested in the cloud data piece, we can certainly get you materials on that if you reach out to me after the call. And then the third use case is analytics. So the potential here is to take any mainframe data, vSAM data, DB2, and move it into a data lake for purposes of future analytics. So for example, if you needed to use it in a Snowflake environment, that is a use case that clients have had. And then specifically for cyber resiliency and for Amy Cloud Vault, and Eric covered a little bit about this, but some of the key benefits that we're seeing from clients: having immutable data protection. We're going to keep using that word because it's so critical to meeting the regulations that people are putting in place all around the world, but it's also critical to being able to recover quickly and restore quickly when there is, unfortunately, some kind of attack. It's also a way to get to better compliance and a way to get to smoother operations, which we all want, especially in an environment where we are running core systems that are mission critical, not just for our customers, but oftentimes for entire companies, entire countries even. And so the need to keep the operations running smoothly is very key. And I just wanted to share one example of a customer that was in the Hong Kong region. I can't say the name, but suffice it to say they had a situation where they were needing to comply with a new regulation that came out in 2021 for what they called in this market the secure tertiary backup requirement. And this requirement was designed to ensure that companies had a backup set up directly in response to the amount of ransomware that was happening. And again, this was in the financial services industry. So the solution the company put together was using BMC Amy Cloud Vault. They were using Cohesity for their on-prem storage. They set up daily immutable backups, and they also gained the flexibility to move to any object storage in the future. So they could move it in on-prem object store as well as in the cloud. The kind of outcomes they were able to achieve, aside from, of course, complying with and meeting the standards that the regulators had set, was that they also got enhanced security of their data. They got better operational efficiency. They got more scalability, better data management, and of course, cost savings. So these are just some of the things that can come to the customer when they start moving to some of these newer technologies. All right, I've got one more poll question for the audience, and then we are going to turn it over to the panel. So here is the poll question. This is another bit of a brain teaser. What is the average time that it takes for an organization to detect a mainframe data breach? So please feel free to take a look at the poll and test your answers.
All right, Priya, I'm going to give this one more second to update. And okay. There we go. I'll go ahead and launch these to the audience.
Okay. Well, it looks like the correct answer is 240 days, and it looks like that was the least popular answer, but that's okay. So that is the answer. 240 days is the average time that it takes an organization to detect a mainframe breach. So pretty sobering stuff when you think about how important that mainframe data actually is. Okay, so we're going to turn it over now to our panelists, and I'm going to invite back, in addition to Eric, Mark Banwell, our Area Vice President for Product Management focused on security, Peter Plevka, who is a technical advocate and specialist focused on optimizing all of your different mainframe environments, and of course, Ted Bacon, who is Director for Sales, again, focused on partners and some of our larger accounts. And so welcome to Eric, Mark, Peter, and Ted. All right, so the first question that we have here that I wanted to ask about is, one of the topics of today's webinar was AI and analytics. And I'd love to hear maybe from Eric to start off, what are you seeing are some of the opportunities for financial services companies as it relates to AI, analytics, and their mainframe data?
One of the biggest ones is looking for new business opportunities or better ways to service customers, ways to improve the customer experience. A lot of data comes back from mobile apps, web server apps, web apps. A lot of data is collected on customer interactions with the banks through those apps and generally. And one of the biggest applications that I'm aware of is to have AI look for correlations between interactions with the bank and opportunities for selling other products, such as perhaps in the consumer area, you have savings and checking, but you don't have a long-term savings account. You don't have an investment account. You don't have a CD, you don't have a credit card, or if you do have a credit card, maybe there's certain credit card products you want to sell around deferred payments for some of the charges, or payment upfront for some of the payroll type of applications. So that's one of the biggest ones that I see, because it's directly related to improving revenue and improving customer service.
And
I
Mark,
would add
anything you'd add? Yeah.
Yeah, I will put my security hat on, since it says so on my shirt here. From a security perspective, as Eric has already stated, we have challenges with social engineering attacks. And social engineering attacks are particularly tricky attacks to detect, because somebody is impersonating one of your staff. And they're impersonating one of your staff. They have all the right credentials. They can multi-factor authentication back. They can prove who they are. And they can move around the systems with the same privileges as that member of staff. And therefore, they are not doing anything wrong. So our sort of standard rules sets will not pick that up. So what we can do is we can utilize AI and the analytics we can get from AI to look at what's normal. And this is called user behavior analytics. It's something that's embedded in our products, whereby you can look at what is normal for that user. Now, clearly, if somebody has taken that user's credentials and are using them to do something nefarious on the mainframe, then they're not going to be doing what they normally do today. They might normally access only 3 of the databases they've got access to, but today they're accessing all 10 and they're doing something different. AI, using user behavior analytics, will detect that and provide that as an anomaly for us to investigate. So we can utilize this technology in a very powerful way. It's not rules-based. It's what is normal for this individual and what is normal for this workload even, and present abnormalities that may be the indication that an attack is occurring or that user's ID has been compromised. So really, really powerful there. And I think that's one of the biggest and most interesting areas with regards to keeping us safe. I mean, ultimately, we've done a lot of talking today about how we recover from a ransomware attack, but how could we potentially prevent it in the first place? And certainly if there is an attack, how can we expedite the forensic investigation into how that may have happened? And AI is going to be incredibly powerful in helping us with that.
Oh, that's great. I appreciate that. Another kind of question that comes up a lot in the mainframe space is just the topic of modernization, right? And modernizing your applications, modernizing your data, your systems, the list goes on. Do you think that we've reached a tipping point in the financial services space on this topic of modernization, and sort of what are you hearing from clients? And maybe I'll turn this one over to Peter to kind of hear from him.
Well, what I'm hearing from clients is they have to adapt their strategies. The mainframe is becoming more and more a database server for all those apps that Eric just mentioned before. But the good news is for us is from the data center point of view, mainframe data center point of view, this is nothing new. For decades, we're doing this, and it's called disaster recovery. Right? So for events like fires, floods, earthquakes, and also most of the time human errors. So they practice that and they are prepared for it. And what is new, relatively new, are the cyber attacks and the ransomware attacks and the need for a third immutable backup that is necessary for compliance. I'm working with the largest Austrian banking group very closely on this and other banking institutions in Germany. But the options, they're about, 400 billion euros of consolidated balance sheet. And they have been doing disaster recovery for years and testing that. And now with the DORA compliance needs, they now work with Hitachi, Vantara, to back up 80 terabytes of critical production data. That's the amount of data we're talking about. So it's a lot on one side, but it's not a lot if you look at the overall data. And they're down now to 2 hours. Every 2 hours, they can create a backup. And they adapted their overall recovery and restore strategy to actually look at the backup as their very, very, very last resort. Therefore, they focus much more on prevention of attacks, early detection of attacks, user behavior analytics, forensic analysis. That's their main focus now to make sure they would never need that backup, because every 2 hours, in 2 hours, account movements for their accounts, the sum of the account movements is about 20 billion euros in 2 hours. So that's the other focus they're looking at, is optimizing recovery point objective. So how much data can I lose? How many transactions can I lose? It wasn't such a big issue if you have enough time and if you don't have to have an immutable backup. Now this is getting more and more important to close that transaction gap in case you have to restore. So I think that's what I see around the mainframe data centers, is particularly in banking and financial area, how they adapt now their their strategies regarding cybersecurity and resiliency.
No, it's fascinating, and it's so true. Again, it kind of goes back to that point around compliance to regulations being such a core piece of this industry. Ted, any thoughts from your perspective that you would want to add to the topic here?
Yeah, for the U.S. based participants in the webinar, three letters that often draw a cringe is the OCC, the Office of the Comptroller of Currency. Very similar requirements have been in place for years. There's a business continuity handbook that goes to the CEOs of the banks in the U.S. and back to the regulations are designed to protect the consumer, right? How fast can you detect a breach? What data do you need to protect? And then how quickly can you recover, to Peter's point? I will lean in on the pivot is about immutability, and organizations have been creating immutability, off for non-mainframe data for years, not believing that the mainframe was as vulnerable, and clearly we've proven that it is. But now, once you move that data off the mainframe for other purposes, according to IBM's most recent cost of a data breach, 35% of attacks are on shadow data. So you've moved your most critical crown jewels data off of the mainframe for other purposes. And if you have not created immutability for it, you're creating an additional vulnerability of that same data. So I guess that's the pivot I would, is that mainframe data needs to be immutable, and that when you move that data, it also needs to remain immutable.
Thanks for that call out. It's very key point around, like Peter said, DR has been around in the mainframe space forever, but this immutable requirement has really changed the game here in terms of what teams have to do. We talked about ransomware too, and we talked about the threat of ransomware. Would love to kind of hear, maybe Ted, I'll stay with you. What are you seeing in terms of that from your customers and partners?
Yeah, so the threat used to be the disgruntled college graduate who couldn't find a job was hacking into systems, and now it's very well-funded nation states, right? And these nation states create cyber militants that they recruit at a very young age to essentially fund much of their other activity. In the case of someone like North Korea, their cyber military is a very prestigious branch of their military, and they're very skilled. Not that long ago, there was a $1.6 billion theft of cyber currency from an overseas cyber currency network marketplace. So you can imagine they are incredibly skilled and very diligent, and they spend all day, every day trying to get access to your systems. So you need to be twice as vigilant about preventing it from happening.
Do you think it's risen to being a board level issue, Ted?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Mark, any thoughts from your side? I know you work with customers every day on the topic of security and ransomware. What are some of the strategies that they're taking to manage these threats that Ted is mentioning here?
As Ted says, not only are the nation states getting involved in ransomware attacks now, but you can actually, as an attacking group, as a criminal group, you can actually rent the appropriate software, ransomware as a service, and in return for that, the ransomware as a service business will ask for 20% of the ransom. I will go with what Eric said earlier. We talked about how much ransomware ransoms are. There was one, the recent attack on Marks and Spencer's and the Co-op Bank here in the Co-op in the UK. The group that attacked MGM casinos about 3 or 4 years ago, and the ransom was $15 million. $15 million in the scheme of things is nothing. It's the reputational damage and the damage to operations. So in the case of Marks and Spencer, a company that's turning over $15 billion a year, a third of that was coming from their online services, and that's what was attacked. And so they're losing $43 million, $50 million a week at the moment from trade. There's been an exfiltration of 20 million sets of customer data, 70,000 of their staff, their usernames and passwords have been exfiltrated as well as encrypted. And there's a class action from their customers against them. And they have to face the data regulator as well for the GDPR breach, which is 4% of their annual turnover. So that could be another $500 million in on top of this. So the ransom itself is nothing compared to the reputational damage that it creates. So having too much of a focus on, we absolutely have to prove to the regulator that we can recover from an attack, but having that as our sole focus, if we had just $100 to spend, we need to spend it on stopping it happening in the first place. That's the key thing, because it's the reputational damage from these things that are the worst things at the end of the day. Marks and Spencer's can recover from a one-off hit. They've been in operation for 140 years, but the reputational damage is the thing that's going to bring the company under. Would you agree, Eric?
Absolutely. And, nonetheless, even if you are taking all the measures, as I talked about, to prevent these things from happening, you have to assume there's a possibility that they will. I think you alluded to this a bit like insurance coverage. If you're spending money, you tend to, to put it another way, you've got your $100 and you think, why do I need to spend $10 on insurance when I could be spending that on business development or something? Because I haven't had a ransomware attack. Well, you can't be overconfident that way. You have to get the insurance. You drive your car for 2 years with no accident. 1 year you have one. You still need the insurance the whole time because that possibility is out there. So yes, prevent as much as you can, but also be prepared to respond as quickly as possible.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a very key point. Go for it. Yep.
Priya, if I may, another customer example regarding this discussion, another Austrian bank, it's a coincidence, but they have a security operations center. They collect security relevant events in real time for many years now, but not for the mainframe, because their mainframe software would deliver those messages in a cryptic mainframe-specific syntax and form. Nobody from the Security Operations Center would be able to decipher. And so another example how mainframe teams adapt their strategies is now that I see with this customer that they need solutions to get security relevant events from the mainframe in real time to their SOC, but in a way that they can be read and understood by non-mainframe people. That's an initiative that I see also at other customers.
That's it. You bring up a really good point, Peter, and I think I'd like to kind of shift towards that point that you made, because it's true. The teams that are running mainframes are handling different types of systems, oftentimes different people. And like you said, they have to translate some of this information into something the other side of the enterprise might be able to understand. Are there things that you would call out? And I'll start, Peter, with you. If you had to give one piece of advice to the people listening on this call, a lot of the ransomware numbers we've heard are just staggering, right? Maybe a little bit hard to process. But what is one piece of advice that you would give to the people that are on this call, the leaders and practitioners in this space? Where should they start?
I go back to my other example, closing the lost transaction gap. So improving on recovery point objective, something that we always tried, getting to a nirvana, to zero loss of data when I have to restore a system after a disaster or whatever happens, or after a cyber attack. Of course, focusing on preventing. But my one thing is, now we have the technology with Amy Cloud Vault. We can deliver something that help you to close that lost transaction gap after you might have to restore from an immutable backup to solve the lost transactions and get your business to the current state.
Very good. Any thoughts, Ted, from you on this point? If you had to give one piece of advice to the people on the call, where should they begin?
So I'll go back to the IBM data breach report. Stolen credentials is the #1 attack vector. It's easy to steal credentials when through a phishing attack, and all it takes is an employee to click on the wrong link. And so now going back to what Mark brought up about user behavior analytics of real-time detection of anomalous behavior. So back to how quickly can we detect? We talked about the 240 days to detect a data breach. You need real-time anomalous behavior detection, because someone's going to mess up and click on the wrong link.
Yeah, and I would add to that, we've, a layer below that, once somebody is in through the perimeter, a lot of mainframe managers have always relied on the perimeter security. But once somebody's in through the perimeter, then we've got the problem, and then we talked about this layered defense. Another element that we haven't really touched on here, and we haven't got time to really go into detail today, is the use of micro-segmentation of networks, creating zero trust networks, where if something is compromised, if a workload is compromised, then a password is compromised, there is no lateral movement allowed across the network. That is just focused on the single job that was intended to do, and the movement across the network is restricted significantly, and we can lock down parts of the network and bring them back up quickly. All of that, that's a key part of a zero trust strategy in an enterprise, let alone the mainframe. And that is another technology that we have access to and we provide to our customers.
That's great. A great point. Eric, any last words of advice to the folks on the audience here?
Well, I think a lot of good points have been made, and especially preventing the biggest cause of breaches around credential stealing and phishing and social engineering, and detecting very quickly when somebody does are all very, very important. But you also have to think of the whole picture. And I would just say, make sure when you're looking at your security posture that you take into account everything. not just the most common aspect or the most common attack surface, but also the consequences of a successful attack, helping to prevent them, but also in the case there is a successful attack, the data is breached, that the applications are breached, that there's ransomware, that you have that solution in place, such as the AMI Cloud Vault, to make sure everything is taken care of and you've got all the insurance to put it that way that you need for everything.
Well, thanks, Eric. And so I want to thank all of the panelists. You've all provided a great amount of insight into what you're hearing from customers, how you're helping them. For the folks in the audience, I want to just mention a few things as we wrap up here. First of all, if you are interested in learning a little bit more, there is a web page you can check out that focuses on BMC's AMI Cloud solution. Of course, you're also welcome to reach out to any of the panelists here today if you have specific questions. We also have a detailed ebook as well as some content around the cloud storage specifically from our product leaders. So we always invite you to check out any of these resources. We did receive a number of questions in the panel or from the audience as well. We were not able to answer every question, so we will make sure to try to follow up with as many of them as we can. And with that, I will turn it back over to Janine to close up our session today.
Great. Thank you, Priya. And I want to thank everyone for attending today's webinar. Special thanks to Priya, Eric, and our BMC panel for sharing their expertise and insights with us today. Later this week, watch for our follow-up email. It will contain a link to the recording of today's webinar so you can watch it again or forward it to your colleagues and leadership to view on demand. Get all the latest on all things tech by going to techchannel.com/subscribe. That concludes our webinar. Thanks again and enjoy the rest of your day.